So in the previous part of Chapter 4, we spent some time discussing sales force development and the organization and the structure of the sales force. And we touched a little bit in that chapter on forecasting. And if you recall, a forecast is a sales manager's best guess as to what will happen if certain actions are taken or not taken by the organization or by their sales force. And so these forecasts may or may not be quantified, but do become the basis for many organizational decisions. And so this appendix to Chapter 4 introduces the 8 types of statistical forecasting used by sales managers to help guide them in their decision-making process. As your text notes, there are a number of reasons why forecasting is important for sales managers. Forecasting is especially helpful in determining how large or how small of a sales force is needed to maximize profits for however they're divided, accounts or territories or whatever. Additionally, it helps make those important territory decisions about the most effective way to cover the accounts or geographical territories, regions, zones, however it's divided, where the organization needs to have a presence. Sales quotas and budgets to achieve those quotas are also determined through forecasting. And as we'll see in some future chapters, forecasting is also very helpful in designing compensation plans, evaluating sales force performance, and the evaluation of pursuing the feasibility of pursuing prospective accounts. So again, kind of an important part of this that we need to discuss before we move into some of the latter discussions in the semester. So in order for a forecast to move from a general attempt or a best guess at predicting what will happen during a given period, there are 3 areas that need to be included and defined by sales managers. These dimensions interact to form a myriad of different forecasts, and the model that's presented here represents about 90 different potential forecasts based on these different dimensions. And so managers need to be very specific with in defining the geographic area, the time period, and the product level for a forecast to truly provide valuable and accurate information to not only their decisions, but also for top management. In order for a forecast to move from a general attempt or best guess approach at predicting what will happen in a given period, there are 3 areas that really need to be included in the consideration and defined by sales managers. And these dimensions interact to form a whole myriad of different forecasts. This model that we're looking at on the slide specifically represents about 90 different potential forecasts based on these different dimensions pairing up. And so managers need to be specific with the geographic area, the time period, and the product level for a forecast to truly provide valuable and accurate information on which top management and sales managers are making decisions. And so if you look a little more closely at this diagram, you'll see that the geographic considerations start very broadly with the world level, and then they pare down all the way down to the individual level considerations with, country, region, territory in between. The time period kind of comes in the small, medium, large variety, starting with the short range or immediate results, a medium range that will put a little more time, a little more distance between the actions or inactions of the organization, and then the longer range time period, which could be looking at a year or even years down the road. What is the forecast for that? And then to kind of wrap that up, the product level is very similar to the geographic in that it starts very small with the product item sales and then grows up to the overall industry sales. So again, these considerations, these dimensions can help us move from, kind of I think this is my gut tells me maybe those types of approaches to forecasting, to a more helpful, more accurate approach to understanding what the implications of actions or inactions are for an organization. It is also extremely useful to consider and define exactly what it is that is being forecasted. And this diagram suggests a differentiation between the industry level and the firm level, as well as determining whether the forecast is a best case scenario of what could happen or a more realistic view of what will likely happen. And so it gives you kind of those categories, this dichotomy that you can use to help define what type of forecast that you're making. And there's a really great example on the bottom of page 116 over onto 117 where it looks at how these categories kind of played out for a personal computer firm that's selling to organizational buyers. So be sure that you spend a little time, reading through that example so you can kind of see what this looks like in action, or in the wild if you want to look at it that way. But again, your market potential forecast is going to give you best possible results at the industry level, whereas sales potential is going to give you best possible results at the firm level. And then if you move into that second column, the expected, if we do this is likely what's going to happen at the industry level, gives you a market forecast, and then at the firm level gives you a sales forecast. And so just kind of dividing that and defining it gives you better parameters for understanding exactly what it is you're trying to accomplish with the forecast. As you may have already learned in other management classes, there are a variety of ways to classify forecasting methods. And so the next few slides are going to provide a little more insight into two of the most basic, the top down and the bottom up. And y'all, they are exactly what they sound like. So this should be pretty straightforward, but the top down starts at the business unit level and then works its way down, and the sales manager will eventually break down the forecast for the sales force. And on the next slide, slide 6, gives you a diagram of how it starts at the top and then arrives at that sales manager's responsibility to disperse that, to communicate that to the sales force. Okay. So in contrast, slide 7, the next slide, looks at the bottom-up approach, where forecasts are developed by the sales force, and then they work their way up to playing a part in the company's sales forecast. And so, slide 7 gives you a look at how it starts, with the salesperson saying, okay, this is what I think is going to happen with this account and this account, and then it works its way up to those being kind of combined to create this forecast for the organization. So no voice on the next two slides, but do look at those. And this is on pages 117 and 118 in your textbook if you need to look at it a little closer after you review these slides. Okay, so for the next few slides, we're going to be discussing 3 of the most popular time series methods of forecasting. Moving averages first, and then we'll look at exponential smoothing and decomposition. And let me just say right now that your text gives really great examples of each of these models that we're going to walk through. So be sure that you keep your book close by So if something is not making sense, you can pause this and dive into your book a little bit and see if that makes it a little clearer the way that the book explains it. So again, this is on we're in the appendix of chapter 4, and this specific information is going to be 119 in your text. So moving averages is a relatively simple method that relies on historical sales averages to predict future sales. So if you look at the chart, well, let me just give you an example first and then we'll get into the chart. So for example, if we were trying to forecast for 2024 sales, you would take the average of 2022 and 2023, or whatever time period is determined to be appropriate, which we'll get into that in just a second. But let's say we're using the 2-year approach. So you would take actual sales, add them together, divide by 2, and that would give you your forecast for 2024. Okay, so this chart is really great because it gives you a 2-year and a 4-year average. Again, that's going to be up to your sales manager or to you as a sales manager to determine what number of years, number of months, whatever it is that you're going to be using to calculate your average. So if you look at the chart, let's kind of look at it just quickly, but the 2-year average, again, is the sum of the previous 2 years divided by 2. So if we look at 2014, we can see that that was 8,400,000 plus 8,820,000 summed and then divided by 2. Okay, and so then if you look at the 4-year, obviously that's your change in the time dimension, so it will become the sum of 2012, 2013, 2014, and 2015. You're going to add all those up and then divide by 4 because that's your year. Okay, so again, very straightforward, uses pretty basic math that you're probably familiar with anyway. The one thing with this is that there are significant fluctuations in sales from year to year. There may be some weighting that needs to be involved so it doesn't throw your average off. But if sales are pretty consistent from year to year, this is a great approach to, pretty simple again to use, and a great approach to using a time basis for calculating your forecast. Okay, so I mentioned on the previous slide about needing to sometimes wait a certain year or a certain time period heavier than others, and that is exactly what this forecast allows us to do. So exponential smoothing is, again, a weighted moving average. So it takes the previous model and gives a heavier weight to a specific year's sales. Okay, so the hard or the tricky part is determining the appropriate weight for the year, the specific year that you're going to weight the appropriate sales. And so that is typically accomplished by examining different weights for historical data to determine which weight would have generated the most accurate sales forecast in the past. So again, you're leaning heavily on this historical data. So if that makes sense, so you would look at if you used 0.2 as your weight, did that predict accurately from year to year in previous years, okay, or 0.5 or 0.8. Those are the examples that they gave you, okay. And so the next slide gives you kind of a comparison of the moving averages and the exponential smoothing, so you can see how closely they got to being on target and how closely they were to being the same number, whether you used just the moving average or you use the weighting. Okay, so that's on the next chart. The next slide. So again, this is kind of taking that previous model that's pretty simple and adding an additional calculation in there to weight. It's usually the most recent period, as the slide says, that you're going to weight heavier because that's what is most, has been most recent, most accurate. So hopefully that makes sense. And again, I won't put, well, yeah, I will. Okay, if you are a visual learner, you're going to love this, this slide. I am a visual learner, so I love this kind of putting this all together. So again, moving averages is your average of whatever time frame you choose, whether it's 2 years, 4 years, 2 months, 4 months, whatever. Previous 2 years, take the sum and then divide by 2. Okay, that's your 2-year moving average. And then if you have 4 years, obviously you take the previous 4 years, divide by 4. Well, the exponential smoothing weights the most recent year a little heavier. And so this is a great visual of, if you'll look, the blue line represents actual sales for this specific company. The red line is your 2-year moving average forecast. The green line is your 4-year moving average forecast. And then if you look, that purple line, which kind of overlaps pretty closely with that 2-year, is your exponential smoothing. So, and you can kind of do some comparison. It looks like your actual sales were higher than forecasted most of the years, especially most recently, right? So that gives you some kind of insight into how accurate your forecasts are, looking at that historical data. So again, if you're a visual learner, hopefully that just kind of brought everything together over these last 2 slides. So the decomposition method is the most complex statistically of the time series methods of forecasting that we've discussed thus far. Like the others, it does rely on historical sales data, but takes it kind of a little further by segmenting that data into 4 specific components. Specifically, those are trend, cycle, seasonal, and erratic events. And so once that data is broken down, it's then reincorporated in developing the sales forecast. So the scope of the statistical analysis for this method is beyond the framework of this specific sales management course, but I do want you to have just a basic familiarity of its functions and its purpose in the whole forecasting scene in sales management. So it is a more conceptually sound model than the previous 2 models that we've looked at, due to the rigor of the statistical analyses that are needed to conduct it or to use it as a forecast. So there's an example on the slide. It's very tiny, so if you need to look at it a little bit bigger, it's on page 120 in your textbook. And you can, kind of read through that and walk through it. I think, no, there's not another example that they go through, but this will kind of show you how it's broken down and then plugged back in to provide that forecasting. Okay, so again, you're not going to be asked to use this model on an exam, but just for the sake of your future career in sales or sales management, I want you to know the basic tenets of how it works and what it provides to a sales manager in the forecasting process. Okay, so the breakdown method is, we're moving out of kind of the time series methods and moving into a method that actually uses market factors to determine how much of the forecast should be allocated for specific regions, districts, or territories. So if you look at that diagram, you can see that District 1 has a lesser responsibility than any of the other 3 districts in terms of achieving the forecast. Okay, and so this is a top-down approach to the forecasting process, and often requires that an organization develop what's called a buying power index, a BPI. And the example in the book gives you some insight into an aviation aircraft marketer who was trying to figure out the forecast based on counties, which I guess is how they did their territory. And so they created this basic formula, which is featured on page 121, where their BPI was the index equals 5I plus 3AR plus 2P divided by 10. Okay, and then they came up with the I in that equation is the percentage of U.S. disposable income in the county. The AR is the percentage of U.S. aircraft registrations in that county, and P in that equation is the number of registered pilots in that county. So you can kind of see where they got those letters. They're just making them up. They could have used A, B, C, and D, but they used them, to kind of give them some insight into how to better distribute the forecast responsibilities for their specific region. Okay, and so this is a more frequently used method for forecasting as far as sales management goes. The indices are developed by specific firms, and then other market factor methods are extremely valuable for forecasting tools for sales managers per your textbook. Okay, so again, you're basically finding a way to weight the distribution of the forecast based on your BPI that you have created. And there's lots of ways that you can go about creating that, again, beyond the scope of this class, but I just want you to kind of have an idea of what each of these are so that you understand kind of the general method and the advantages and disadvantages of using one over the other. The key to this one, and this is the last bullet on the slide, is that those factors that you're using to create these indices, and also the territories divisions, they have to be continuously monitored and evaluated, because there'll need to be adjustments made as there are fluctuations in some of those numbers, right? So I in that equation would be, the percentage of U.S. disposable income in a county could fluctuate from year to year, so you need to adjust that. So that is your breakdown method. Okay, and this is just a visual of the breakdown method versus doing an even allocation. So if you look at the top is the example of even allocation, where the company has a sales forecast of 1 million, and so A, B, and C all get the same exact portion of that forecast. Almost one gets 0.34 instead of 0.33, but you see the point there. And then the bottom method uses the breakdown method. So you can see region A is going to be working toward like a $200,000 goal. B is going to be $300,000, and C is going to be $500,000. Okay, based on those indices that they created, they weighted those different regions higher or lower based on ability to sell in those regions. Okay, so that's just a visual, nothing really new on that slide, but just to give you an idea of how it looks to go even allocation, everybody's getting the same thing, versus using this breakdown method to help you weight and more effectively distribute the forecasted sales as far as potential. Okay, this last group that we're going to talk about here is the bottom-up approach methods to forecasting. And these are pretty straightforward. Like the first one is a survey of buyer intentions, and that is exactly what it sounds like. It's the procedure used to ask or gather information from individual accounts regarding their future purchasing plans, and then their responses then become the basis for setting a forecast. Okay. And there's you can collect that information in a whole myriad of ways. Your text says mail surveys, telephone surveys, personal interviews, or other approaches. You could use, email. You could use, now you've got so many technology avenues at your disposal. You could use just about anything to collect that. Okay. So then you come together and kind of summarize what the forecast needs to be based on those estimates, their intentions, or estimates of their intentions. Okay. Your text does note that these forecasts are sometimes distorted due to buyers' unwillingness to put much effort into predicting, and often they are just unwilling to reveal their plans. So that's kind of the downside of using that survey of buyer intentions. Okay. The jury of executive opinion is similar, but it comes from an internal frame of reference, meaning that executives and other experts within the organization come together to forecast sales for individual accounts, and then the estimates are then averaged or agreed upon to generate the overall forecast. And so these managers or these experts, executives may come from different parts of the organization. So you may have someone in sales, you may have someone in marketing, you may have someone in production. Like it's not just going to be one side of the organization, so to speak, but it's kind of like a group of people who come together who understand the whole scope of the organization. And then these are said to, because they're of this team-based approach, said to be more accurate in long-range industry-level forecasts than the individual approaches. Okay, so asking the individual buyers to share their intentions and having the team-based approach is going to be more accurate. So the next approach is the Delphi approach, and this basically creates an anonymous jury of executive opinion, and so the information is distributed within the firm to members of the panel, okay, the jury, and they are asked to submit anonymous forecasts for each of the accounts that is under review, under discussion. And then those estimates are summarized and then redistributed for reconsideration or revisions, and that process continues until a consensus is reached. Okay, and so it kind of takes out like the possibility of someone feeling bullied or not wanting to speak up, or someone being over the top speaking up. So it makes it a little more where people might be willing to share more openly. Okay, so that's the Delphi. And I think, let's see. So if you look on, this is the next one. Okay, so Salesforce Composite. So this is the bottom of the bottom up. Okay, so this is where the salespeople are actually the one to create the forecast for their accounts, their territories, their whatever it's divided. Okay, so they may use some type of CRM system to enter this information, and they submit it all electronically into a company database that provides information about their individual accounts, and then it's all the data is aggregated, and the forecasts are made from that. Okay. So managers can also use this data, this input into the CRM to develop weekly, monthly, and quarterly forecasts. So that's important too. In reaching your overall goal for, let's say, the year, is to make sure that you're on track in each, week, month, quarter. Okay. One of the examples in your textbook on page 122 is an example of a form that a firm uses to get their salespeople to do forecasts. So that's kind of cool to look at that and how that works for that specific organization in their CRM platform. Okay. So again, these are bottom-up approaches, which, if you remember back a few slides ago, bottom-up is not the top managers telling people what they're going to do, but the bottom salespeople having more of an input in how that's going to work. And so, again, the sales composite is probably the lowest bottom because it is the salespeople, making those forecasts, making those estimates. The survey of buyer intentions, great way to, honestly, even if it is not, doesn't end up being your forecast, it's a great way to have discussions with a potential buyer, kind of that whole sales dialogue mindset. And then the jury of executive opinion and the Delphi are pretty similar, just with the Delphi being a more anonymous approach to coming to a consensus on what the estimates should be. Okay, so those are your bottom-up approaches. Okay, so our final 3 slides look at forecasting using regression analysis. And regression analysis relies on statistical packages like SPSS to develop forecasts at all levels of the organization. An example of the market response framework is on the next slide, slide 16, and illustrates the various determinants of a market response. Some are outside the control of the organization, like those environmental factors. Some are organizational characteristics or attributes, and a number are specific to the individual salesperson, such as their effort, their aptitude, or even their motivation. So once the factors are identified, then values of each planning and control unit in the previous period are measured. Then SPSS is used to estimate the parameters of the regression equation. And an example of the subsequent regression model is shown on the page of the top of page 123, where it gets territory sales equals, and it has the environmental factor component, the organizational factor component, and the salesperson factor component. Okay, and they are defined, help define the relationship between the determinant factors and the territory sales. Okay, so while regression analysis is very useful, there are 2 basic weaknesses that we need to be aware of when we use this. And first is that interdependent effects of the determinant variables are incorporated, but these variables are actually highly interrelated. Okay, so they're put in, but the interrelatedness of the factors is not taken into account. And second, the type of equation that is developed is linear, but the determinant variable relationships are probably more accurately depicted as nonlinear. So your text goes into some additional details of how to conduct this on pages, it starts on page 122 and goes through 124 with these 2 charts that are the next 2 slides included. So if you want to kind of get the context for those, you can go to those pages. But like I said earlier, that level of statistical analysis for these models is beyond the scope of this particular course. And I'm hoping that our goal could just be to tackle the basics of what each model is and what the purpose is in this forecasting process, and maybe also identify some of the strengths and weaknesses. So that's kind of what I've focused on with each one. So to wrap up this appendix, chapter 4 appendix, I want to leave you with pointing out the chart that is on pages 126 and 127 in your textbook. And so this chart provides a quick look at the strengths and at the weaknesses of each of the models that we've discussed. And so this is going to be a fantastic way for you to start preparing for exam questions from this section of the text, okay? So again, listed out here, all of the different models that we've talked about, strengths in one column, weaknesses in the others. Focus, as you think about studying, focus on, not only the strengths and weaknesses, but the basics of how to conduct it, and, kind of the purpose, like how it fits in the forecasting scene for an organization, okay? So that is all of chapter 4 appendix.